For some discussion on what's been happening in Ecuador, I'm joined now by Canada-based writer with Ecuadorian roots, Joe Emersberger. Good to have you with us, Joe.
Hi, how are you?
Much to talk about, but let's begin with some context into what's been going on. Lenin Moreno was actually the vice president under Correa, who was hugely popular as president and actually left with incredibly high approval rating numbers. Take us back to how we got to where we are now with so much opposition to this current government now.
Right. Well, Moreno ran his 2017 campaign for president as a Correa loyalist, saying nothing but wonderful things about Correa, calling him legendary, the greatest president ever, and all that kind of stuff. And like you said, he had been Correa's vice president for 6 years, and then a special envoy to the UN for 4 years. So part of Correa's government for 10 years. So when he said he was going to carry on the same essential policies, people had good reason to believe him. However, within weeks, I'd say 4 to 8 weeks at most of taking office, he showed that he was a complete imposter and that he was going to go 100 degrees against everything that he said he represented. So he immediately started trashing Correa, accusing everybody who he had worked with so closely of corruption. And the way he got away with it was largely due to the fact that the public media and private media were both on the same page. During Correa's time in office, Correa and the public media, they had one point of view, and the private media, they represented the other side. So they were battling each other. But as soon as Moreno got in office, he turned that around completely. And it was just a one-sided media that allowed him to do all sorts of things. And especially a huge part of this is, Moreno has nothing to fear from the courts because he's been able to stack the judiciary to his liking, to the liking of his right-wing allies that he made as soon as he took office. So, when there was somebody expressing disappointment that the Constitutional Court, didn't prevent Moreno from all these repressive measures and state of emergency and all that. Well, how could it when the old Constitutional Court was fired through this elaborate process that Moreno set up, where he had this hand-picked body by this lengthy acronym, the CPCCST, that basically through them indirectly in some ways, but restacked the judiciary so that he has nothing to fear from the judiciary, and he basically is not challenged. The judge that goes against him will just get replaced. In fact, 2 judges on the National Criminal Court were just replaced because they made a ruling that Moreno and his allies didn't like. So with that, he's been doing nothing but tax giveaways to the rich. He's refused to borrow internally because that's something that, ideologically the right wing doesn't want the government to borrow internally for itself. They want them to go to the private sector and take out loans at much more expensive rates. They don't want import tariffs, which Correa used, which were crucial to Correa being able to navigate Ecuador's economy in the last 2 years he was in office through the declining oil prices and the shock of the earthquake that they had in April of 2016. So he has refused to do that. So he's done everything that the right wing wants. All the tax giveaways, the cuts in attacking workers' rights, and that. And now with the deal with the IMF, now they've imposed even more stringent conditions. And this is where all his is really the costs are now going to be borne more heavily than ever on the poor in Ecuador, because Ecuador has a dollarized economy. They can't print their own currency. So, it's Ecuador, you have to be extremely careful to how to manage the economy properly. And Moreno's, his priority has been to just give the rich everything they want. And now that's inevitably going to come with a very harsh austerity measures. And it's going to open question whether he'll be able to survive this and for how long.
To discuss the media coverage in Ecuador and around the world, or in this case, the lack thereof, what do you make of the double standard in reporting that we've been seeing?
Well, it's very obvious. Right away, we see articles referring to the protesters as rioters. When protesters take to the streets in Venezuela or something like that, they're never called rioters, no matter what. Even if they do things like burn people in the streets, they're not called rioters. And also, Luis Almagro just put out a statement. Finally, it took him a while because they don't really want to say anything. But he put out a statement and he said he basically didn't say anything about police repression at all. In fact, the only thing he very clearly condemned was any violence or vandalism by protesters. And I mean, that's 180 degrees the opposite of what they do when there's protests in Venezuela, or if or there are any protests when Correa was in office. So it's completely different. Human Rights Watch, they're quick to jump on anything that Correa did and accuse him of being repressive. I haven't seen anything from them. I've looked, and they've just kept totally quiet, because they were very big cheerleaders of Morenos and of the way he stacked the judiciary, the way he wanted it to be, to enable him to do all these things.
Now we have the hugely unpopular President Lenin Moreno teaming up with Venezuelan opposition figure Juan Guaido, trying to place the blame for these huge mass demonstrations on external factors like former President Correa and others in Venezuela. Why this allyship?
Well, that was very. I mean, Camara even recently says he looks forward to the day when people like Jaime Nebot and Guillermo Lasso are in office as president. He just said that recently. I mean, again, this is people expect very little sincerity from politicians, but even for people who are very cynical about politicians, what Moreno did, his about face as soon as he took office, the way he just turned, is just remarkable to see. Yeah, and like you said, he's totally allied with all the right-wing forces in Latin America. And they're all 100% behind him. In fact, 7 of the governments, according to Reuters, just issued a statement against, like you said, Maduro. Trying to blame Maduro for this is just the height of stupidity. I mean, I think Guillermo Lasso takes the prize, though. He said that the Venezuelan, Maduro's using Venezuelan money to finance protests. And everybody knows that Venezuela's going through a brutal economic disaster, in large part, for the past since 2017, because of Trump's really draconian sanctions. So to say that they're using their money to destabilize Ecuador, it's just the height of stupidity. But again, with this media, these people just say whatever they want to say. Like Moreno, for instance, when he expelled Assange from the embassy in Ecuador, he just told all these outlandish. I mean, anybody with any sense knows that he was lying when he said that Assange was smearing his own feces on the walls and stuff. But when the media wants to believe something, they'll just regurgitate it, and that's kind of been his approach ever since he took office. Just throw any wild allegation against his rivals and let the media back him up on it. And but what he's got to now is the point where you can lie to people a lot, but eventually when you start really cutting into their livelihoods, into their ability to make ends meet economically, now media spin can't help you much there. There's reality you have to contend with.
Great insight, Joe. Thank you so much. We've been chatting with Canada-based writer with Ecuadorian roots, Joe Emersberger. You're welcome anytime. Thanks again, Joe. We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute.